1967, which we talked about, where the Six-Day War occurred. From 1967, this is the only time that we've actually seen where the sovereignty of Jerusalem came under the Israelites and this is in the period from after the fall or the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. So it has to be the start of the final generation. And a generation is 70 biblical years. And if we work on 1967 and take it through 70 biblical years, we come out at 2036. And that is locked in. It is part of this generation that Jesus talked about. In Matthew 24:34, Jesus said, "This generation shall not pass until all these things are fulfilled." All the things that have got to happen in this generation from 1967 through to 2036 are all detailed in Matthew 24. All the pastors and teachers around the world have missed this. When you are listening to any pastor who gets up and talks about a final week or the 70th week and does not refer to the final generation of 70 years starting on the 7th of June 1967, they're a false pastor and a false Christ.
All right, let's make sure we're all on the same page here. Leo has locked in 1967 as the beginning of the final generation that Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 24, which is the Olivet Discourse. It's the chapter where Jesus' disciples ask him, what will be the sign of the end times, the end of the world? And after telling them about the signs, Jesus says, this final generation will not pass until all these things have happened. So Leo has unlocked 1967 as the beginning of this final generation. So why 1967? We'll get to that shortly. But first, I want to check his math. So Leo believes a biblical generation is 70 years, especially for long periods of time. I can check that because I know from the genealogy in Matthew chapter 1 that there were 14 generations from Abraham to David. So from the Old Testament, I found that David died 2989 years from Adam, and Abram was born 2008 years from Adam. So this means there were 981 years between them. And then we know this was 14 generations from the genealogy in Matthew. So yeah, 70 years for a biblical generation, especially over long prophetic timelines. You know, it looks right. All right, so 70 years from 1967 brings us to 2036, which Leo believes is the end of the world. This is when Jesus will actually return. And so come back 7 years from there, and you get 2029 for the beginning of the last 7 years, the start of Daniel's 70th week. You know, I mean, this will be the Antichrist week. And when I say a week, I mean 7 years of actual time. All right, so why 1967? I think it's because Israel took back the sovereignty over Jerusalem, which was the outcome of the Six-Day War, because Israel had lost its sovereignty over Jerusalem after their temple was destroyed by the Romans. But I need more color on this, so let's keep going.
The fact that Jerusalem defeated Jordan,
yes,
and got the holy city back,
yes,
in 67.
That's what happened.
Yeah, and that was the important part, really, wasn't it?
Very important.
You can't be Israel without the holy city.
Correct.
So for the first time since 70 AD, they've got their holy city. They took it back in 67, not 48. They took it back from the Jordanians.
Correct. Absolutely right.
Excellent.
Yeah. We're right into this last generation. And this is where the churches are totally misleading people. Any traditional timeline followers starting at 445 BC without the Your Holy Timeline cannot get to that date. It's impossible. You need the Your Holy City timeline.
All right, so I think I get it. The mainstream churches and Christians on social media all teach that Daniel's timeline, for thy people, started in 445 BC, where they timestamp the beginning of Daniel's timeline to Nehemiah chapter 2 and King Artaxerxes. And what they do is they go forward 69 weeks, which is 69 times 7 years, so 483 years. And this gets them to the crucifixion in 32 AD. So from 445 to 32 AD is 69 weeks. This then leaves Daniel's last week remaining. They can't exactly tell you when that final 7 years will be, just that it'll happen when it happens. So they keep that final week, as Leo says, floating. Yeah! This is because, unlike Leo, they have not recognized a second timeline pertaining to thy holy people. And this timeline is time-stamped to Cyrus in 538 BC. And it's this second timeline that is the key to unlocking 1967. All right, let's keep going.
This is 9:23. This is what the angel Gabriel gave to Daniel. At the beginning of thy supplications, the commandment came forth, and I, being Gabriel, am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore, understand the matter and consider the vision. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgressions and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring an everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy.
The situation is Daniel's 70 weeks, but it actually is 7 generations of 70 biblical years each. It's all about the sovereignty the Israelites have over Jerusalem. 538 BC, the most important thing that happened was the 77 determined by God given to Daniel. And this was backed up on earth with Cyrus, who then made a decree, but that decree held fast, and the sovereignty of the Israelites over Jerusalem stayed intact until Alexander the Great overthrew the Persian Empire in 332 BC. The period of time was exactly 210 biblical years. That's actually 3 generations of 70 biblical years. 70 years is a period of time that's referred to in Psalm 90:10, 70 years, which are given to as a lifespan for people. We see that as a generation, and Daniel's all about sevens. And then in 332, Alexander the Great brought the whole thing to a halt, where the sovereignty of the Israelites was then stopped. They lost sovereignty over Jerusalem.
So at that point there, 3 times 70 weeks has been used up.
Correct. 210 biblical years and 3 generations of 70 years.
Yep.
All right, I get it, but let's consolidate. So from Cyrus in 538 BC, Israel had sovereignty over Jerusalem through to 332 BC when Alexander the Great conquered Persia. At that point, Israel lost its sovereignty. You can see that God has time-stamped his prophecies to big historical events and big personalities, which is super cool. So from 538 BC to 332 BC is 207 years, which Leo converts to 210 biblical years, which are based on 360 days. And to convert, you simply multiply by 365.25 over 360. So pretty basic. And so 210 biblical years is precisely 3 biblical generations of 70 years. All right, let's keep going.
In 138 BC, we saw that the pause was lifted when Simon Thassi, who was one of the Hasmoneans, or the leader of the Hasmoneans, and they were otherwise known as the Maccabees, he went to Rome and got the Roman Senate to give him, or the Israelites, sovereignty over Jerusalem again. And that was, as I say, 138 BC. And so we saw the timeline begin again. This ran right through to the time when Titus took sovereignty back for the Romans over Jerusalem in 70 AD. That period of time was 210 biblical years, or a further 70 generations, 3 generations of 70 biblical years.
All right, that was clear. But let's check anyway. So Israel regained sovereignty in 138 BC, which Leo traced to Simon Thassi, and they held sovereignty until 70 AD, when the temple was destroyed by the Romans. And this period of time is 207 years. And remember, there's no year 0 BC, and we know that 207 years converts to 210 biblical years, and so that's another 3 generations. All right, good.
So 6 generations of 70 biblical years have been fulfilled as at 70 AD. When did Jerusalem become part of, or under the sovereignty of the Israelites again? when did this occur? And there's only one date.
I feel like I should know this.
It's the 7th of June, 1967. This is during the Six-Day War, when the Israeli Defense Forces conquered or took over the control of Jerusalem. And that's the only time that the Israelites have had sovereignty over Israel in that whole time frame from 70 AD is 1967.
Yes.
So it's very clear this is the start of the final timeline.
Which is how you locked in 1967? Yeah, I totally get it. That's insane. So, one last question, if I may. I mean, Israel was reborn as a state in 1948. So why wouldn't you begin the final generation from that date?
So to put it simply, 1948, the United Nations gave Israel their land. But in 1948 and after, Jordan had control of Jerusalem. So Israel wasn't complete. It wasn't until 1967 in the Six-Day War that Israel defeated Jordan and got their holy city back, which started the timeline.
Correct. Now that timeline goes from 1967 to 2036. It's 70 biblical years. To get the start of the final week of Daniel, or the 70th week, whatever you like to call it, just take off 7 years, and it becomes 2029. We're going to spend a lot of time on 2029. It's a very important year.
So we've left out a lot of figures and dates in this podcast. We've got the book, Daniel Decoded. All the dates is all in Daniel Decoded, and it's laid out there. It is a little bit complicated, but it's all there in sequential order. So if you like what's happening here, if you've read the books, you've seen our podcasts, like and subscribe and comment.
Yes, you must subscribe, because we're going to take you down on a journey on the end times. If you've got some questions, don't hesitate to leave them on as a comment, whether good questions, bad questions. Otherwise, we're happy to try and do our best to respond to you. Thank you very much.